All right, welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're jumping into a pretty big story from the gaming world, a controversy that actually led to a company doing a complete 180. This is all about what happens when players push back and, a publisher actually listens. So yeah, let's get right into it. So, the whole thing kicks off with a game that a ton of people are excited for, right? Vampire the Masquerade Bloodlines 2. The big promise was this super deep RPG experience where you could play as one of 6 totally unique vampire clans. But here's the catch, and it's a big one. They were planning to lock 2 of those clans behind a paywall. You'd have to pay extra just to access them. So here's how we're going to break this all down. We'll start with the controversy itself, then get into the community's backlash, the surprising victory for the players, what was really going on behind the scenes with that decision, and finally, what's still kind of up in the air. So to really get why this blew up, you have to understand this isn't just any game. We're talking about the sequel to a huge cult classic. So for the fans, the hype, and the expectations were through the roof. So look at this. The initial plan was to sell the game with a full third of its playable character types, the clans, chopped off and sold separately. I mean, for an RPG that's all about choice and who you want to be in this world, that just felt, well, it felt like they were asking you to pay extra for what should have been part of the core experience, right? And yeah, as you can probably guess, people were not happy. The community did not take this quietly. The reaction was, well, it was fast and it was very, very loud. And we're not talking about a couple of angry posts on a forum here. This was a huge wave of negative feedback that went global. Gaming media, YouTubers, streamers, everyone was talking about it. The vibe was just this massive collective disappointment, and you could feel the pressure mounting. So with all this heat, the publisher really had a choice to make. And what they did next is what makes this whole thing so interesting. They actually blinked. So what do you think happened? I mean, we've all seen this movie before, right? A company does something people hate, and they just double down. They ignore the feedback. So with a potential PR nightmare and sales disaster on their hands, were they just going to power through? Nope, in a move that, let's be honest, shocked pretty much everyone. They came out and said they'd had, well, they called it an epiphany. They listened to the feedback and announced a complete reversal, a total 180. And what did that mean? Simple. All 6 clans were now going to be in the base game at launch. No extra charge. This was just a clear, straightforward win for the players. Proof that their voices actually, literally changed the game. So the big question is, why? Was this some noble act of putting the fans first? A moment of generosity? Or was it just a smart business move? Because the why here is maybe even more interesting than the what. It's really easy to see this as a black and white story. First, the company is the villain, then they're the hero. But this quote really hits the nail on the head. We should avoid criminalizing them before and beatifying them after. The truth is always in the middle. The reality is almost always more complicated than that. Let's be real, this was almost certainly a business calculation. You can probably map it out, right? Step 1, they floated an idea to make more money. Step 2, they waited to see how people would react. Step 3, the reaction was a disaster. They realized this plan was a double-edged sword that would hurt them way more than it would help. So step 4, they made the right choice, which also just happened to be the best choice for their bottom line. And that brings us to our final section. What lingers in the shadows? The victory is won, but doubts remain. Because even though the players won this particular fight, the whole thing left a bad taste in a lot of people's mouths. The skepticism hasn't just vanished. So yeah, even after this win, people are still on edge. They're seeing other paid DLCs get announced before the game is even released, which is a bit of a red flag for some. Then there are worries that the game itself is becoming more of an action game instead of the deep narrative RPG everyone loved. And a big question is, will these clans even feel that different to play outside of combat? Plus, other things like localization issues for some regions are still completely unaddressed. So yeah, the doubts are definitely still there. But, even with all those lingering worries, you can't deny what happened here. It's being called a small, great victory. And that's exactly what it is. It's this perfect, powerful example of what can happen when a community actually comes together and speaks with one voice. It can make a real difference. And that really leaves us with one last big question. This was one battle that the players won for one game. But when you look at the bigger picture, at the whole war over monetization in gaming, does a win like this actually change anything in the long run? Is this a fluke or a sign of things to come? That's something to chew on.